In 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that capital punishment was unconstitutional. But the court reinstated it in 1976. Since then, over 1,000 executions have been carried out.
I read that according to recent statistics, 67% of Americans favor the death penalty in cases of murder. That's 2/3 of the population.
In the United States, there are about 9 murders a year per 100,000 people. In Japan, for example, that figure is 0.5. In France, it's 1.1. There is probably no issue in criminal justice today more controversial than capital punishment, the death penalty. As you probably know, the United States is the only Western industrialized nation that allows capital punishment. In 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that capital punishment was unconstitutional. But the court reinstated it in 1976. Since then, over 1,000 executions have been carried out. Executions are usually carried out by lethal injection or electrocution. Today, I'd like to talk to you about some of the main arguments against this form of punishment. Of course, the first question most people ask is, does capital punishment deter crime? Well, although there are studies that have linked the increase in executions with a decrease in homicides, a great many social scientists argue that there is no such link. In fact, states with the most executions are also the states with the highest homicide rates. So I do not believe that it is an effective deterrence. The death penalty does not deter murder. My second point is that capital punishment is not used fairly. Nearly all prisoners who are sentenced to death are poor males. And some states, like Louisiana and Mississippi, still use the death penalty, whereas other states, like Iowa, do not. Race is also a factor. Historically, African Americans have been more likely to be executed than whites, both in proportion to the general population and to the prison population. I have another major objection to capital punishment, which is that because we are human, there is always the possibility that we can make mistakes. We always have to question if we have gotten the facts right. According to the Death Penalty Information Center in Washington, at least 138 prisoners were released from death row in 26 states because they were improperly convicted or because evidence of their innocence was discovered after they were sentenced to death. In the state of Illinois, a few years ago, there were 26 people on death row, and 13 of them were released because new evidence proved that they were innocent. These are 13 people who would have been executed by the state. So in other words, we do make mistakes, and we have to allow for the possibility of that error. Once you execute somebody, you've done something that should not be in the domain of the state. It's almost as if you're playing the role of God on life or death issues. I believe that killing someone is a moral decision, and that it is not a decision the state should make. Now I'll take some questions.
Yes, I have a question. Isn't it true that the public supports the death penalty? I read that according to recent statistics, 67% of Americans favor the death penalty in cases of murder. That's 2/3 of the population.
It's true that there is support for the death penalty, but it is also true that people's moods and opinions are difficult to understand through statistics. I think this figure might reflect people's concern about violent crime in general. The United States is by far the most violent industrialized nation. In the United States, there are about 9 murders a year per 100,000 people. In Japan, for example, that figure is 0.5. In France, it's 1.1. So, Americans are understandably concerned about violence.
Excuse me, Mr. Stack. What did you say the figure was in the United States?
It's about 9 murders per year per 100,000 people.
I'd like to make a comment. I mean, if someone commits a really bad crime, don't they deserve to be punished just as severely?
The problem with the death penalty is that on an emotional level, you can understand why people want it. If you've suffered the loss of a loved one, your immediate response is to want revenge. It's a normal, natural reaction. But I feel that the reason we have laws is that they allow us to rise above our personal, emotional response to crime. This form of retribution is not the answer. The idea of having laws in a society is that together, as a society, we are stronger than the sum of our parts. We can rise above our personal, emotional response to crime. The legal system is supposed to make us better. It is set up so that it is better than us. Individually, we are flawed, but as a society, we are strong, and more states are eliminating the death penalty.
I thought it was interesting what you said about the death penalty not being fair because it was applied to some people but not to others. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. In many ways, capital punishment is very arbitrary. If you really believed in the death penalty as a principle, as a punishment for a horrific crime, then every single person who has committed this crime would have to be executed. But that would mean that we would have about 50,000 executions a year. That's absurd. Nobody would stand for that. It would mean that the state was some kind of killing machine. The fact is that we do execute some people, but other people who have committed similar crimes are not executed. So the death penalty is not applied equally to all people.
Mr. Stack, I'd like to thank you for your comments today. I'm opposed to death penalty myself, and I don't think we talk enough about these issues.
I'm pleased to be here. Thank you.